Hi, I'm Linda Quinlan.
I'm Keith Ghostland.
I'm Ann Charles. Welcome to All Things LGBTQ. We're taping on Tuesday, June 5th, and we have a lot to talk about tonight.
And shall we start with me?
Sure.
All right. Biggest case for LGBT community, as we all probably know by now, is the wedding cake decision. Betsy DeVos, how do you sleep at night? Oregon businessman says his reputation tanked after shunning an LGBT group. Connie Kurtz, who turned her coming out as a lesbian into a lifetime of activism. Members of the armed forces sue Pentagon over HIV discrimination. Forget New York City or LA, HBO is opening a new studio in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Yeah. Lesbian accuser who took down Cosby gives her first interview.
I saw that.
T.R. Knight gives life, a gay poet taken by the Nazis. 29th annual Lambda Literary Award winners, some of them. And Netflix debuts fierce trailer for new cartoon about drag queen superheroes. We have a clip for that.
I hope we have costumes for
They
that.
do. They do. They're all dressed.
Don't you think we should?
I think so.
Cynthia Nixon loses Democratic nomination but still plans to run for governor. FX Pose is the fame reboot TV needs. So those are my headlines.
So, in consideration of that masterpiece cake decision, what are my rights? And I have a list of both Vermont specific and federal to talk about. Sit back, we're going to be here for a while.
Oh, someone on Facebook made a joke I thought was really funny. It said, "Have your cake and eat me too."
Oh, well,
I didn't say that. That wasn't me.
all right.
There was a veto of the mitigating racism bill, and we'll talk a little bit about the reason behind it, and I actually have the governor's statement and executive order if we need to reference. Couple of announcements. There is a new LGBTQ veteran support group that will be meeting at Christ Episcopal Church here in Montpelier. They will meet on the second and fourth Wednesday of the month. Next meeting is June 13th, and they're from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at night. Outright Vermont, they're doing their gala, and it's on Thursday, a Thursday night, which is a school night for us. What are they doing out? June 21st, you can get tickets online.
We have our tickets.
So do I.
All right.
And for this week, we all know about the Stonewall riots, June 28th through July 1st, 1969, Stonewall Inn in New York City. What do you know about the Stonewall Inn? You may find it surprising.
All right.
Okay, what exotic places you taking me to?
Well, first Guyana, which had its first gay pride parade to demand election promises. So Guyana's in the news. The German president apologizes for all the atrocities against the LGBT community, both during the Nazi era and afterwards.
Paragraph 175.
Bermuda ends marriage equality, and I'll give you a rundown of that sad situation. On the upside, Wales is leading the way in LGBT inclusive education. So I'll tell you a little more about that. A transgender woman who was part of the migrant caravan has died in ICE custody. An Indian mob kills a transgender woman over fake rumors spread on WhatsApp. Then my other stories I may not get to in their entirety. The gay mayor of Poland is shaking up politics in the Catholic country. He's an atheist. I have a picture of him now. His name is Robert Bidron.
Go, Robert.
That's right. He was beaten up. He was the first gay MP. He was beaten up as the MP, and now he says people say, "Good morning, Mr. Mayor." So things have improved for him. Ghana's state-owned newspaper urges citizens to reject LGBT rights. This is more from Ghana. And finally, Belarus calls same-sex relationships fake after the UK raises a rainbow flag. And I have the picture of the UK embassy raising the rainbow flag, and there was a bit of backlash in Belarus. So those are my headlines.
All right. Well, as we all know, we had the decision by the Supreme Court. I don't know if we want to have a little discussion about that, but I'll just give a little tiny background. The Supreme Court ruled today in favor of Jack Phillips, a Colorado baker who refused to make a custom cake for the same-sex couple. He believed that doing so would violate his religious beliefs. Although Phillips prevailed today, the opinion by Kennedy rested largely on the majority conclusion the Colorado administrative agency that ruled against Philip treated him unfairly by being hostile to his sincere religious beliefs. The opinion seemed to leave open the possibility that in future cases, a service provider's sincere religious beliefs might have to yield to that of the state's interest in protecting the rights of LGBT people, and the majority did not rule at all on one of the central arguments in the case, whether compelling Phillips to bake a cake for a same-sex couple would violate his right to freedom of speech. So,
And we had talked before we started taping about this, and that one of the pieces that we sort of got lost in our conversation from when the case originally started is that his suit was against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission.
right.
And that's what I don't understand about the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, it sounds like they ruled because the Civil Rights Commission was biased against the Phillips.
What they did is they looked at the transcripts and said that it was very evident from the transcripts that the Civil Rights Commission did not take his religious argument seriously and met him with open hostility. So his claim that they didn't treat me fairly, I did not get a fair trial, is what they ruled on, and they said, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes. Although, I'm not optimistic. I mean, a lot of the LGBT media is kind of soft-pedaling it and saying it's not so bad. And it remains to be seen what the court's going to do in the future.
And the next case that comes up will really be telling.
And there's a case already coming up out of California.
Mm-hmm.
And what
about flowers.
Right. And what I had personally put out as part of an internet conversation is that Justice Kennedy, in his argument, clearly broke down, if you read the entire case and the entire decision, that this does not render a decision on religious freedom versus anti-discrimination. That's something to be solved later. There were 4 clearly siding on the side of the anti-discrimination statutes, 2 clearly siding on the side of religious freedom, and the other 3 were giving no opinion. So who knows where the court is going to go with that.
Given its conservative makeup, though, it could go, and who knows.
Part of my conversation is what's happening in the conservative press is they're already saying they won.
Exactly.
And
they're claiming it as a victory.
They're exaggerating what it does. And my fear is looking at all of those 17 federal judges that the 45 regime has already gotten in place.
Right.
They're going to rule as though that truly was the decision.
I know.
And that's where we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
So we'll
and people are saying, what happened to Elena Kagan? Because Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented.
Well, no, because she came down on the side of she was looking at the transcript and the integrity of the law. Were you given the due consideration to which you were due? And the answer is, no, you weren't.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
So
if we're going to play by the rules, we have to play by the rules.
So we'll have to keep looking forward and seeing what happens in the next case.
And we'll be talking to you about your rights.
Yeah.
So what else you
And
got?
one more thing. If you haven't seen Ruth RBG, the movie, see it. It's
It was great. We liked it.
That's because we love her.
That's because we
She's
love her.
famous for her dissents, though, and this was a good one. I
Yes.
agreed
Yeah.
with it entirely.
All right. So we
Now
have.
that you've provoked us.
I
right.
know, huh?
How much time do you have left?
Sarah Gilbert says she stands behind ABC's decision to cancel Roseanne. Wanda Sykes leaves the Roseanne show following the racist tweet. Wanda was consulting producer on the revival. And now I have a clip of Betsy DeVos, How Do You Sleep at Night? LGBTQ advocates project data on education department building. The Human Rights Campaign with artist Robin Bell displayed data from a survey revealing the experience of 12,000 LGBTQ teens taking aim at the Trump administration policies that advocate, saying they have targeted these young people. So on that picture you can see it gives the data, but it also says how can you sleep at night. So that's kind of. Parkland survivor David Hogg does a die-in at public supermarket to protest the company's donations to Adam Putman, a Republican pro-gun candidate for governor of Florida. Public responds and says they will not make any political donations, at least temporarily. So whatever that means. Does that mean temporarily this week or next week or next
Until
year?
you're not looking anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or we'll give private donations, or whatever. And this was an interesting story. It was about an Oregon businessman between a rock and a hard place. And he says his reputation tanked after shunning LGBT groups. He is suing for $2.3 million. After turning away PFLAG, Portland's black chapter, his troubles began. PFLAG wanted to use his facility for a party. However, the owner of the center, who had leased to him the venue, was owned by the Holy Rosary Church and signed a moral clause which would require the owner to turn away business from the LGBT community. Following the church's order, the center refused PFLAG. But when the word got out, other businesses and event groups refused to use his venue. When the leaser of the center tried to invite PFLAG back, he was told by the church to vacate the property. So, I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have.
But we love you.
Yes.
Yeah.
But maybe he shouldn't have, I don't know,
Certainly you shouldn't have.
signed a contract
Yeah.
that said he had to discriminate against LGBTQ
Of course.
people.
I remember when we were first founding Vermont Cares, and the office space we were renting was from the UU Church in Burlington. And they gave us their standard rental agreement, and it had a morals clause in it. And it was the first thing we took out.
You know it. You know it.
Please.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And then we have Connie Kurtz, who turned her coming out as a lesbian into a lifetime of activism with her wife, Ruth Berman, including serving as plaintiffs of New York City school employees died on May 27th at her home in West Palm Beach, Florida. She was 81. Kurtz and Berman were married to men when they met in the late 50s in Brooklyn. They hung out together and their kids played together. But things changed when Miss Kurtz returned from living in Israel in 1974. They became a couple and advocates for gay rights. So.
May I say something about Michael Moore and Roseanne?
Yes.
Or not
Are
Michael.
they an item?
No, but I read.
Oh, he likes her.
I read an article by Michael
Yes.
Moore, and he traces they were friends, but then he, said she has a lot of psychological problems, including
She says
multiple
she's personality.
personality.
Well, she says she's bipolar. And
But anyway,
dissociative
his
identity.
idea, he said I didn't watch the 8 episodes of this show, but he said it was really cutting edge about working class issues, and he said it should continue without her, and that
I
all
did
the
hear that.
Yeah, and so
There
that's,
is a conversation about that possibly happening
Right.
with Sarah Gilbert being the central character.
oh, that would be great. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
You don't buy the Ambien made me say it? Okay.
oh, and Ambien's mad. They
Yeah.
issued a disclaimer.
There may be a lot of side effects, but racism is not one of them. I love that.
I'm a racist. Yeah, exactly. And just for this last part here, I'm going to say members of the armed forces sue Pentagon over HIV discrimination. A 2-time war veteran was kicked out of the military long after being identified as HIV positive. So the service members and others responded as any HIV warrior would with a sweeping lawsuit. Under Trump's new policy, which bars any service member living with HIV from being enlisted or commissioned once their status has been identified, Sergeant Nick Harrison spent years acquiring the training and skills to serve his country as a lawyer. Lambda Legal and OutServe SLDN filed a lawsuit on Harrison's behalf. So, there we go. And in local news,
Well, since you're talking about the military,
yes,
let's talk about your rights.
okay.
Because, I mean, one of them that I have down on the federal was...
State rights or federal?
Both. I've got
Okay,
I have both.
all right.
Because you may travel across our borders occasionally.
Once in a while.
Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2011. So that you could serve in the military and in the National Guards, which is important, even though it is a Vermont-based, it is under the federal regs, the
Right.
federal oversight. But remember, there is still the challenge to that transgender ban that 45 really wants to do. Sex. Am I allowed to have sex?
Oh, I don't know.
Vermont in 1977 repealed their statutes so that consensual and non-commercial anal sex was now legal.
All right.
Whoa.
Remember the non-commercial part. And they also changed the age of consent so that it was consistent regardless of gender or activity, 16. One thing of interest that I found when I was researching it, it is not illegal to be nude in public in Vermont, but it is illegal to disrobe in public.
Whoa.
You can figure that one out for
Get
yourself
undressed at home and then
That's
go
why all
out.
those nude bicycles go by all the time.
at least once a year.
Yep.
On a federal level, there was a Supreme Court decision in 2003, Lawrence versus Texas, which repealed the sodomy laws so that we can now legally have sex in all states. Something to which we could aspire.
Now we can cross the border.
Same-sex relationships, Vermont, of course, was the first with civil unions in 2000. We were the first to legislate marriage equality in 2009. And it happened on the federal level with the Obergefell decision in 2015. Now, one of the interesting things about the Obergefell decision,
Obergefell.
what she said, new lips, breaking them in for a friend. The federal decision is that it granted same-sex couples the same rights of marriage, which means all of the things associated with that, such as when we start talking about adoption. State said that only married couples could adopt, and that's how they were able to get around not letting LGBT adopt, is because we could not get married. This removed that. So they're now having to go back in, and this is the strategy from the alt-right, is in state statutes removing the benefits associated with marriage to try and weaken the underpinnings. Legal recognition of gender diversity beyond the male-female binary. In Vermont, there is a proposal that we're looking at non-gender identification first on driver's licenses and then other state-issued documents. I don't think we even need to talk about what might or might not be happening on the federal level. For anti-discrimination, based on sexual orientation, there are only 22 states in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico which garnish protection. It has to be on a state-by-state basis. We did it here in Vermont in 1992. For gender identity in 2007, there are 20 states, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, that have similar. And we know that, actually, that's up to 21 now. I take that back, because New Hampshire did theirs just this year. Hate crimes, actually, one of the first states was in Maine, and Vermont modeled our policy after theirs. We did a comprehensive bias and hate crimes bill in 1990 for sexual orientation, then went back in 2007 to 1999 to include gender identity. Our non-discrimination for gender identity was in 2007. And our non-discrimination includes employment, public accommodation, education, housing, credit, insurance, and union practices. But one thing that I found very interesting during the most recent legislative session, there was a bill that was introduced by Allison Clarkson and Becca Ballant and Debbie Ingram. And it was a equal pay bill. But what their bill was trying to do, in addition to what passed saying you couldn't
Equal
use
pay for women?
you couldn't use salary history.
Right.
What
Right.
they were saying for equal pay is they wanted to expand the wage discrimination provisions to include all protected classes. So that, if you're hiring LGBT into it or a woman into a traditionally male, you've got to be doing it at the same. So we may be looking at seeing if that will come back again. On a federal level for non-discrimination, particularly in employment, there is the decision that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does not allow gender-based or sexual orientation employment discrimination. And as we are unfortunately aware, the 45 regime is not supporting that, and is way up through to the Supreme Court again. And they're going to be filing in the amicus brief saying, no, we should be allowed to, based upon our religious beliefs. We love you, but I want you to be unemployed and homeless.
Yeah.
And there we are. And under gender identity and expression, Vermont permits both pre- and post-transition individuals to change their gender on birth certificates and state-issued documents, which is,
Yay.
we won't even talk about the federal level.
No.
And one of the things for which we need to be very aware, and in one sense be thankful, Vermont does not have that comprehensive sexual freedom bill that has happened in some states and they have tried to do on a federal level. So that there is no provision in place that actually would precipitate that sort of religious freedom versus anti-discrimination statute conflict. And of note, Vermont has the highest LGBT population per capita of any place in the country. And when it comes to support for marriage equality, 80% of Vermonters support marriage equality, which is the highest in the country.
All right.
Very good.
So now you're going to take me to some place where I have no rights.
The little
Well,
state that
Guyana.
could.
And does.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Guyana.
All
And
righty.
I have a picture of the first incident with the only gay pride parade, and it was incident-free. It's the first parade. Activists accused the 3-year-old government of breaking their election campaign promises to outlaw discrimination. We are saying enough of the rhetoric, enough of the promises. It's time to make good on the legislative changes that we heard about from both parties in the 2015 elections, and we want to see action, and action now. Joel Simpson, head of the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination, said the parade was incident-free. There was a lot of chatter on social media here and there and so on, but Guyana did us well. Guyana did us proud. There are colonial laws against buggery and cross-dressing still in place. They've got to go. A number of paraders waved placards stating messages such as walking with pride and love. And here's, I introduced this picture before. I have a
Buggery, even if it's non-commercial?
LGBT rights are human rights, another sign said. Be who you are, not who the world wants you to be. So, good news out of Guyana. Germany also has finally gotten around to apologizing to the LGBT community. I have a picture of the President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who issued this apology. He said he asked forgiveness for decades of suffering and injustice that gay LGBT people endured as a result of the repressive laws in Germany in the Nazi era after World War II. He said this Sunday in a ceremony marking the persecution of gays in the Hitler regime. A German news agency said that the harsh treatment continued in the post-war era in both parts of the then divided Germany, where homosexuality for years remained a criminal offense. The president said, "I'm asking for forgiveness today for all the suffering and injustice and the silence that followed." So good for him. Now,
and they've done that in Canada.
Yeah.
When are we going to do it? Never, never.
Well,
The next presidential election, 2020?
Maybe,
Yeah, okay.
maybe. We'll see. But let's go to bad news from Bermuda.
Oh no,
Again.
Bermuda again.
Yes, the same thing. Law repealing marriage equality and replacing it with domestic partnerships that offer the benefits of marriage took effect, making Bermuda the first government in the world to halt marriage equality. Now, 2 constitutional challenges to repeal the law were heard, but no ruling has been issued. The ruling from the same court had brought marriage equality to Bermuda in 2017. There's only been one other repeal of marriage equality in history, California, whose voters ended it via ballot initiative in 2008. The court ruling overturning the voters' decision took effect in 2013 when the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal by the initiative sponsors. Voters in Maine once blocked a marriage equality law from coming into force in 2009 and then redeemed themselves and allowed marriage equality in 2012. Voters in Slovenia blocked marriage equality law from coming into effect in 2015. So Bermuda leads the way backwards.
We're close behind.
I know.
But they offered domestic partnership, this sort of separate but equal premise of. Now, Bermuda, they would actually appeal it to a British court?
I think a Bermudan court and the British could intervene
Okay.
if it chose,
But
and
they
it failed
haven't,
to.
they've chose not to.
And it, didn't do anything in Northern Ireland, as I reported last time. Although Theresa May has been last month issued a statement to the Commonwealth nations to get hip and, provide same-sex equality. And that's part of the reason that Guyana was happy to have its Pride Parade, but Ghana responded virulently about it. Don't tell us what to do. Homosexuality is a colonial import. So, anyway, mixed record for the UK, in my view. But let's go to Wales, if we could, where exciting things
She's on a roll.
exciting things are happening in education. 30 years ago, back to Britain's bad deeds, Section 8 was introduced into UK law, banning the promotion of homosexualities in school. This month, on the 22nd of May, Welsh Education Minister Kirsty Williams introduced new legislation making LGBT relationship and sex education compulsory in the Welsh curriculum. And it's not going to be, as she said, just an awkward meeting in biology. It's going to be throughout the curriculum, and they call it Relationship and Sexuality Studies.
Great.
30 years ago, Margaret Thatcher denounced local education authorities for teaching children that they have an inalienable right to be gay. I want all our learners to know that they have an inalienable right to be happy, she said. This is not the first time Wales has pulled ahead of the rest of the UK in terms of LGBT inclusion. Earlier this year, Stonewall named Welsh Assembly the top LGBT employer in Britain, and a Welsh man, John Randell, founded the first gender identity clinic in the UK. Now, the downside LGBT hate crime is an all-time high in Wales and also in the UK, which is why education reform on this subject feels not just revolutionary, but a necessity. So it's going to be rolled out in 2022, and they're preparing for it right now. It won't be relegated to one lesson a week or an awkward hour of biology, but will be applied to every subject. Good. Teachers will be engaging with LGBT topics in regards to relationship and sexuality education in a number of ways, from gender rights and humanities to building self-esteem and empathy through the expressive arts, she says.
I think we can think of that as a retirement place.
And
I'm writing it down for, I want to approach our Department of Education saying,
look what they're doing and how. And of course, a Welsh women's officer who organized the first LGBT club night said, if this had happened when I was coming out, I would have come out sooner.
Yeah.
And I think many of us can say that.
Well, I'm looking at it saying you're finally going to teach me how to do it properly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wales is not the first UK country to implement this education as statutory, but one of the first in the world. So.
Okay.
We're proud of you.
Shall I continue, or do you want to go?
I think I will do a little, and then we can go.
Okay.
We can go back down the road. What
That's
do you
fine.
say?
We may have reason to opine on other people's stories too. I'm happy to give my time over to that.
I was going to say, we seem to be really good at that tonight. And you really want to weigh in on this veto.
I do.
From New York City or LA, forget New York City or LA, HBO is opening a new studio in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The cable channel is using the idyllic Cape Cod city to promote LGBT-friendly programming and take the temperature of queer taste makers. HBO's output opens July 2nd.
She said that so carefully.
We were just there. Does that make us a queer tastemaker?
Yeah, and maybe we'll be, well, anyway.
We should have our
anyway. HBO's Outpost opens July 2nd and will include live discussions with the editors of Out, The Advocate, The 10th, and will be hosting screenings, parties, art exhibits, ice cream socials, and drag queen trivia.
Oh, honey, they need us.
So I know.
That's right.
So they need you.
Oh.
Lesbian accuser who took down Cosby gives her first interview. She said she didn't think anyone would believe her. After all, it was Bill Cosby. It was Dr. Huxtable. Andrea Constand said after the 2004 rape. Constand, once promising basketball star, put herself online to take down the serial predator. In 2015, she came out publicly as a lesbian to challenge her attacker's assertion that he knew how to read the desires of the women he assaulted. That's one of his arguments. Unbelievable. Ellen and Portia head to Rwanda for Wildlife Fund. The couple will oversee construction of a gorilla conservation center there.
I think it's Portia.
Yes.
It's Portia or Portia?
Portia.
Portia.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's her last name?
I don't know.
Over dinner, it was just Portia.
T.R. Knight gives life to gay poet. Taken by Nazis, a National Geographic series. They're doing a National Geographic series about different people, and one of the people is a poet, and it begins as a pivotal scene in Genius. Picasso, a young Picasso, is sketching with him in a small Paris apartment. His roommate, the French poet Max Jacob, notices Picasso's fatigue. He employs his friend to rest beside him. Max, I love you, but not the way you want me to, Picasso says. For actor Knight, the opportunity to portray a gay poet was the chance of a lifetime. Born Jewish, Jacob converted to Catholicism in 1909. Regardless, he was arrested by the Gestapo during the Nazi occupation of France in World War II. He died en route to the concentration camp. He was 67. So that might be something. And it's a National Geographic series. I think there's a National Geographic station.
Yeah, Nat
Yeah.
Geo.
Yeah, so it's probably there. 29th Annual Lambda Literary Award winners. Cleve Jones for When We Rise.
Yeah.
My Life in the Movement, a gay memoir. Jacqueline Woodson and Jeanette Winterson were honored for their lifetime achievements. Lesbian fiction, Here Comes the Sun, Nicole Dennis Benn. Gay fiction, The Angel of History, Rabin Almadine. Bisexual fiction, Maro Island, Alexis M. Smith. Bisexual nonfiction, Black Dove, Anna Castillo. Bisexual poetry, Mouth, Abigail Child. Transgender fiction, Small Beauty, by Wilson Yang. So for a complete list, you can go online. I just wanted to
And
put
lesbian
out a
fiction.
few out there.
Lesbian fiction was Carmen Maria Machado,
Yes.
Her Body and Other Parties.
Which we're reading
in
for our
lesbian
book group.
Yes.
Cleve Jones, that's the AIDS Project, that's the quilt.
Yeah.
And Roxane Gay, bisexual memoir, Hunger.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And so the list goes on and on. There's about 40 of them, and I didn't want to list
40
them all.
categories, yeah.
Yeah. So, queer women candidates ready to fight for the community. Nikki Antonio of Ohio, Kristen Seal, who recently defeated Philip Block in a PA House of Representatives. Also, I think, aren't there elections today?
There's
Primaries, in
Primaries
about
today.
6 or 7 states.
And
on
seven-
Tuesday, not on Saturday.
Right.
On Tuesday,
So
June
tune
5th.
in.
And, I guess we'll be looking for the results of that. There's a lot of good Democrats running.
But that's a problem.
Too many.
Did you see the
Yeah.
concert with California? Where
7.
it's the top 2 vote getters,
That's right.
and there are so many Democrats that it may actually be the Republicans
That's the fear,
that are
yeah.
the top
no.
vote getters. So it will knock out all those good Democratic candidates.
Well, let's hope
Yeah.
not.
Let's hope not.
Let's
So,
tune in.
But that
And
was one of the
I
things
know
you'll be watching
the
for. kind of-
downside, yeah, of all the candidacies.
You want to talk about vetoes?
no,
Okay.
we can't.
I know Ann does.
Netflix debut fierce trailer for new cartoon about drag queen superheroes. I have a clip about that, and they follow the drag queens fight as they fight evil and look damn good while doing it. During the day, they work in a department store. By night, they tighten up their corsets and transform
When she
into
said
the-
tighten, I was afraid.
and become the baddest people in town. Now, here are their names. Lemon Chiffon, Crane's Sapphire,
Ooh.
and Crimson Scarlet. So,
Crimson Scarlet, I
Yes.
love it.
so take a look at that if you want, and that should be pretty fun.
Watch me do my walk.
Drag Queen Superheroes.
I think that should be a discussion group viewing.
We could,
Just, you know,
yes.
And as we know, gay cure therapy was outlawed in Hawaii.
Good.
In
So-
Maryland.
And Maryland. Yeah, I think Maryland was well, anyway. Go ahead.
Maryland and Hawaii passed it, and they both recently, their governors have signed it into
Yes.
law, so.
So there we go.
So we had a bill, S-281, an act relating to the mitigation of systemic racism. Mouthful. What the bill ended up doing was creating a position within the governor's cabinet to do an oversight of state government. And then there would be a panel to advise on action to be taken, priorities, etc. The governor vetoed this, even though he supports the
The
language,
idea.
but not necessarily the letter of the law. And this is what he said in his letter, and I'm going to hand it to Ann afterwards so she can read it, is that there were significant constitutional concerns given separation of powers. The legislature was creating a position within his cabinet. There would be a group of people from the community who would make recommendations. He would do an appointment, but then they pulled away his authority to remove the person from his cabinet. That could only be done by the panel. And he said, no, I don't think so. And what he did, well, and he has suggested language saying that if they were to modify it, saying that the governor could only remove it by the recommendation and consent of the panel and for just cause, that he would support that. But they did not amend the language to reflect that. So what he has done, and again, because he fully agrees with the concept, in his letter says, so there's no delay in the important work in front of us, he took basically the bill and has enacted it by executive order, saying he's creating the position, he's giving himself the same powers as he would as the executive for any member of his cabinet. He is putting the panel in place, giving them all the powers, all of the oversight that the legislation did. And then he actually expanded on the legislation and said that everyone in state government now has to have training on an implicit bias, racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. And that will extend to all elected officials, everyone in the cabinet, and everyone in state government, including all the boards and commissions. And there's the letter, so you can look at the salient points. But we were having a conversation about this before we started taping, and there are snippets of it that was released in the press.
So why didn't
But
the
not really all of
legislature want to give him that power?
Well, if I'm reading his letter correctly, and this is the letter that the governor sent to the Senate, the clerk of the Senate, saying, I'm hereby vetoing it, which is their protocol. He had made the recommendation, but it was so late in the session, they passed this bill on the last day of the session. And traditionally what happens is that after a bill has passed both chambers, then legislative council and all of the necessary people get together, do the final draft, and then it gets sent to the governor.
Okay.
You know, and then the governor has 5 days in which to make a decision about either signing it into law, allowing it to go into law without his signature, or vetoing it. And I know you had questions, which is why I was giving you the letter specifically, so if there was an answer.
Because I read some coverage that implied that it was just a power play, and he wanted control, that he really should have the council should be independent, and that he shouldn't really be able to fire people.
But that's not what they did. I mean, it was part of the conversation that Ann and I had before we started taping. When we approached the Human Rights Commission, and the Human Rights Commission has jurisdiction over state employees, state employment, some degree of state government, they made that independent. Mm-hmm. They didn't with this. What they did is the panel that's created is independent, but basically the executive director or this new position was a cabinet member. It was not created as a separate entity that had oversight over state government. They made it part of administration, and that's where the conflict laid.
Mm-hmm.
I get that.
I get it too, although I'm still not pleased about it, but, you know.
Well, and there's
All right.
also a sunset provision in this that the executive, so the legislature can go back and make this permanent and make all of those modifications, including making it totally an independent agency. The same
they
as the
can do
Human Rights.
that.
They can still go back in. This sunsets on June 30th of 2024.
Uh-huh.
So, and they could go back in at any point. It's the same as on the federal level. 45 can issue an executive order, but Congress could pass a law trumping it.
Do you think they'll do that?
The answer is I don't know, because they're in special session. This just happened this week, so there hasn't been a chance
Maybe
to really
next
talk
year.
about,
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was truly created either within the Human Rights Commission or as a sister agency to the Human Rights Commission, that would be great.
Wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
That would be.
So
a
do you
good
have
thing.
some truly uplifting stuff
Oh,
to
let me tell you.
bring us home?
I have this sad story of a transgender woman, Roxana
I saw that.
Hernandez, 33.
Yeah.
She died in ICE custody. She was part of the caravan of Central American migrants who arrived at the border this month.
They were looking for to immigrate to the United States because of
Yes,
discrimination,
Hernandez
right?
asked for asylum
Asylum,
on
yeah.
May 9th, which, according to the group that organized the caravan. She was detained by customs in holding cells known as ice boxes because of how cold they are. In addition to being cold, she lacked adequate food and medical care and was held in a cell where the lights were turned on 24 hours a day.
Geez.
On May 16th, she was sent to the transgender unit, a federal prison facility in Milan, New Mexico, that contracts with ICE. The preliminary cause of death was cardiac arrest, but the reason she felt she had to leave Honduras was because of discrimination and violence she faced for being transgender. 4 months before joining the caravan, she said she was walking home when MS-13 gang members started screaming, "We don't want you in this neighborhood, you fucking faggot," at her before gang raping her. 4 of them raped me, and as a result, I got HIV. Trans people in my neighborhood are killed and chopped into pieces, then dumped into potato bags. Standing in front of a church, playing with a silver cross, she said that gangs had continued to threaten her and told her she had to leave the area where she lived in Honduras. I didn't want to come to Mexico. I wanted to stay in Honduras, but I couldn't. They killed trans people in Honduras. I'm scared of that. So she put money together. She was stopped at the border, and now she's dead. I have a picture of her, 33. People said she was safe because she got to the U.S. Hardly. That's
So much for give us you're tired, you're hungry, you're
Yeah.
I could give you the ICE statement, which I think I'm highly
And then all
suspicious
those
of.
children, too.
Oh, it's just heartbreaking what's
Heartbreaking.
going on. But ICE says they didn't do anything wrong.
We were just following protocol. We were just following orders.
They
The
received
same as
medical.
Nuremberg.
dental, and mental health intake within 12 hours arriving, they said. A full health assessment within 14 days, and access to daily sick call and 24-hour emergency care. I certainly don't believe that. But more bad transgender news from India this time, where a transgender woman was killed and 3 others seriously injured when they were attacked by a mob of angry locals acting on rumors that the women were child traffickers in the Indian city of Hyderabad. And what's interesting here is that there's a WhatsApp program.
I have a WhatsApp.
You do?
You do too.
Oh, I thought maybe I did. So this WhatsApp.
The things that you learn on this program.
They were begging for money at 11 o'clock, and some unruly youth started saying that they'd come to kidnap children. Up to 20 people took part in the attack, while a crowd of up to 200 people stood egging them on. The accusation stemmed from WhatsApp messages that have gone viral in the region, claiming that transgender women are behind a plot to kidnap young children. As of Monday, 12 people had been arrested. For at least 15 days in India, a lot of rumors on WhatsApp and other social media have been shared about gangs kidnapping children. Images of dead children, purportedly from India, had been shared via text messages, but they were found to originate from the war in Syria, or alleged ethnic cleansings of Rohingyas in the Rakhine state, Myanmar. There's no basis for rumors of kidnap gangs in Hyderabad, the public official said.
Myanmar is what used to be Burma.
Yes. WhatsApp has been at the center of the rise in fake news in India. Its popularity has grown in line with the rise of socio-religious political activism in the country, with political parties, especially the ruling BJP, making use of the messaging forum, being fast, free, and functional on a range of smartphone operating systems, including ours, apparently. It has emerged as an effective campaigning tool. In the wrong hands, however, it can be used to circulate disinformation.
45 is exporting his fake news propaganda internationally.
Actually, I have gotten news campaigns from local officials on WhatsApp now that I know what it is.
I put it on your phone.
Okay. Well, so sad news from India.
When she sleeps late, who knows what she's going to sneak on there. So, Stonewall.
Yes.
And I quizzed them both before we started taping. We know a lot about the Stonewall riots, but what about the Stonewall Inn? The Stonewall Inn was built in 1843 originally as a stable. And as both knew, at the time of the Stonewall riot, the inn was owned by Fat Tony Loria, who might have been a mafia family member.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
The envelopes slipped to law enforcement at the end of each week. The Stonewall Inn didn't have a liquor license, but who cared? They also didn't have running water or a fire exit.
Okay, what year was this? Do you know?
1969.
You're kidding.
No, this is in 1960. This is at the time of the riots.
I was thinking like 1919.
Oh, no, Linda.
Okay.
No.
And what made it attractive is that there was an ordinance in New York City at the time that same-sex dancing was not allowed. It could be the precipitant for a raid, and it was the basis for it. This was the only dance bar for gay men in the entire city.
Wow.
And if you weren't interested in the dance bar on the first floor,
Now it gets juicy.
you could go up to the second floor, which was known for its cash-only transactions, where you might be able to get a hooker and a baggie and have a good time. And the riots itself, a lot of discussion about how it started, who started it, etc. One of the commentaries I read, and I loved it, is that it was started actually by Stormy de la Reverie, who apparently had been dragged out of the bar 4 times that night, kept getting away from the New York City police, and on the 4th time, when they were about to throw her in the back of the van, she looked over at everyone else and said, "What the fuck are you guys waiting for?" and it let loose. I liked that story.
Me too.
And as a passing comment, and totally unrelated, and I had intended to say this at the beginning of the show, if you have not seen the most recent youth edition, please go online and look for it. They're talking about suicide, self-harm, and I want you to keep in mind, these are our youth and how they're really looking at the impact that internalized homophobia
And
is a precipitant for their actions.
they're like 14, 15 years
Exactly.
old. It's amazing. It really is. I just want to say, before we go off the air,
We're going off the air?
Oh, no.
off the air for today.
Did we do a racist tweet and we've been canceled?
I think not.
Damn.
Cynthia Nixon has lost
okay.
the Democratic nomination, but she plans to run. So you still will have a chance to vote for the homo and not the Cuomo. So,
All right, on that note, my friends,
I like that tagline.
you will see us again in 2 weeks. In the meantime,
resist.